The Torah in this week's Parsha, Parsha's Beshalach, it's Shabbos Shira. And it's called Shabbos Shira because, of course, we have Shiras Yisrael. It's one of the beautiful little vorts you can say at the Shabbos table of the Shabbos. Very easy to remember. Why is it that just because we have Az Yashir in this week's Parsha, this Shabbos gets a special name, Shabbat Shira? I mean, first of all, we could have called it the Shabbos where the manna falls. Why don't we call it Shabbat Haman? We could call it Shabbat Hamayim because we got water in the desert. Why do we call it Shabbat Shira? Just because it has the song of Az Yashir. And furthermore, there's so many other Shabbatot which have special episodes in them where we don't give the Shabbos a special appellation based upon that special episode in the Parsha. What makes Shabbos Shira so special? The Meforshim point out that this is the first time that instead of God speaking to the Jewish people speak to God. And that's what makes it so special. What's truly remarkable is that when we're able to find our own words, our own voice, and verbalize to HaKadosh Baruch Hu ideas of holiness, ideas and words of Kedusha, to be able to express what exists within us. And that Hashem has a much greater appreciation, so much so that he said through his rabbis, give the Shabbos a special name, the Shabbos of us singing a song to Hashem. Okay, so we have this beautiful Az Yashir, and yet at the end of the Az Yashir, where Moshe is leading the men in song, we have the little sort of the two-sentence, very, very abridged portion that is for the ladies. Okay? It always works out that way, that men get all the space and all the voices and all the noise, and then the women get at the end and they only have the two sentences, right? So what does it say? It says in Parshas Beshalach, Vatikach Miriam HaNeviah, and this is in SHMOS Perek Tetvav. Miriam, the prophetess, who is Achos Aharon, she's the sister of Aharon. She takes us Hatof Biyada, she takes the tambourine in her hand, or the drum, some sort of hand drum. And all of the women follow her with these musical instruments. Vatan lahem Miriam, and Miriam answers to them, or responds to them. Shiru Lashem ki ga'o ga'asus v'rachavo ramavayam. Sing to God, for he is truly lofty or exalted. Horse and rider he has thrust into the ocean. Okay, so first of all, what is it about Miriam and the women that sort of put them in second place? That really is the first question that we have to ask. Is it always because the women sit in the back of the bus? Is that the reason why? That's question number one. You know how I feel about that. All right. Question number two. Why does the Torah call her Achos Aharon and not Achot Moshe or Bat Yocheved or Bat Amram? Why is she identified as the sister of Aharon? That's a famous question that the Gemara actually addresses. One of the very difficult things is actually what the nature of the Shira was. If you take a look in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, it says, Vatan lahem Miriam. Miriam responded to them. What kind of verb is responded? She's not responding, she's leading them in song. So why does it say that she was responding? Isn't that a little bit strange? It should have said, Vatomer lahem Miriam, or Vatashar, that Miriam sang to them. But to respond to them, what's also difficult is the grammar. Anyone see a grammatical difficulty? Yes, what is it? Yes, very good. It says lahem, which is to them masculine, and not to them in the feminine. So is she speaking to the women, or is she speaking to some group other than the women? That's another difficulty that we have to reconcile. And probably what's most difficult is the nature of the song itself. It says, Ki Shiru Lashem ki ga'o ga'asus v'rochavo ramavayam. Miriam's not interested in the salvation of the Jewish people. She just cares about the fact that God threw the riders and their horses and their chariots into the ocean and drowned them all. Drowned all the Egyptians. Yes. Right? Is that the relish in the revenge? Is that what Miriam is really all about? Is that why she has reason to rejoice? What about the Ashira Lashem ki ga'o ga'ah? Right? In other words, let me sing to Hashem. Why? Because Aziv Zimras Kav Ha'ili Lishua. Zekeli v'anveu Eloki avi va'arom emenu. This is my God, I will exalt him. He has saved me. He has been for me. Not Miriam. No, Miriam is threw the Egyptians into the ocean and drowned them. That's what it's all about. So that's what we have to try and understand about this song. And I'd like to explain this based upon a beautiful commentary of the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer of the 19th century, who explains as follows. He quotes a medrash, which I've only found a portion of the medrash in the version that he quotes it, is that, and that's source number 2, which we'll just say outside. The medrash says that the Malachim, when they saw the defeat of the Egyptians and the salvation of the Jewish people, the Malachim wanted to say Shira. The Malachim wanted to sing to God. And God said to the Malachim, hold on. You got to let Yisrael say Shira first. You got to let Yisrael say Shira first. And so the Malachim waited patiently for the men to sing their Shira, for Moshe to lead the men in song. And then they said, okay, now we want to say Shira. And God says, no. You got to wait for the women now to say Shira. And so the angel said, all right. So they had to wait for the women. And then it came time for them to sing, and they sing finally at the end. So the Medrash says, when it says, Vatan lahem Miriam, that Miriam is responding to the Malachim. She's responding to the angels. This is what the Medrash says. That Miriam was basically defending herself in the presence of the angels, because the angels wanted to go ahead of the women. It's one thing we have to wait for the men to go first, but we have to wait for the women as well. Why should that be? And Miriam has to respond to them and say, no, we go first. Vatan lahem Miriam. That's what it means. And that's why lahem is in the masculine and not in the feminine. Now that would seem to be somewhat discriminatory against women, the way that the Medrash is portraying it. But that's not the case. Let's take a look at 2 one-line Gemaras that are stated by Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi in sources 3 and 4. One is from a Gemara in Megillah Daf Daled, and the other one is from a Gemara in Psachim Daf Kuf Ches. The one is Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Nasham Chayavot b'Mikra Megillah, Sha'af Hein Hayu Ba'oto Hanes. Women are obligated in the reading of the Megillah. A woman is obligated to read the Megillah or to hear the Megillah. And the reason is because they too were part of the miracle. They too were part of the miracle. Another statement of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, this one from Tractate Pesachim, says, Nashim chayalos ba'arba'a kosos halalu sha'afin hayu ba'oso hanes. That women are also obligated to fulfill the mitzvah of arba kosos, the 4 cups at the Seder, because they too were part of the miracle. So the question is, what do those words mean? They too were part of the miracle. If I were to ask you how you understand the words af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, they too were part of the miracle, what do you think that means? Anyone want to offer a suggestion as to what that means? Yes.
They were threatened as well, and they were saved as well.
They were threatened as well. There was the Jewish populace in general, not just the men. But that's not the way the Rashbam explains. Sha'af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, in source number 5, the Rashbam to Maseches Psachim says that it's not just that they too were part of the miracle, but they were a primary impetus for the performance of the miracle. And it goes back to what the Gemara says in Sota, that it was the reason why women have to have arba kosos is not just because they too were part of the miracle, but they were an integral part of the salvation. If it were not for the women, we wouldn't have gone out of Egypt. It was only in the merit of righteous women that we were able to be liberated from Egypt, as the Gemara explains, that when the men had given up hope of ever being redeemed, it was the women who maintained their emunah and their bitachon in Hashem, that Hashem will eventually save us. And that's why they insisted on having more and more children. Whereas the men said, let's just give up. What's the point of having more children? We're just bringing children into a life of misery and slavery. It was the women who said, what are you talking about? Hashem's going to liberate us. We're going to become the chosen people. And the same thing when it comes to the story of Megillas Esther. It's not just that the women too were threatened. But the miracle took place through via Queen Esther. Had it not been for a woman, there never would have been a story of Purim. And so it's not just that they too were part of the miracle, they were an integral part. The women were the foundation of the entire story of Purim and the entire story of Pesach, of the redemption. Tosfos asks a question on the Rashbam. Tosfos in the Gemara in Maseches Megillah says, he brings the Rashbam's understanding, and he just says in source number 6, the second line, he says, Vikashe, de lashon she'af hein, mashma she'hen tefelot, ulepirusho hayalomar she'hen. Asks Tosfos, the language of the Talmud itself, the rabbi's language is extremely precise and exacting. And if the rabbi said, Sha'af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, that they too, or even they were part of the miracle, that implies that it's not that they had a primary role, but it's just they also were part of it. So, but according to the Rashbam, who says that they were an integral part of the miracle, it should have said, because they were part of the miracle, not they too, or they also, or even they were part of the miracle. Do you see the question? Does the question make sense? The word af, she'af hein, that even they were part of the miracle, is somewhat misleading according to the Rashbam. So here's where the Chassam Sofer offers a beautiful interpretation. He says that what is more miraculous? What is more of a miracle? When a righteous person is privy to some supernatural phenomenon, or an unrighteous person is privy to a supernatural phenomenon. In other words, if God parts the Red Sea for the ultimate tzaddik, is that a greater miracle, or is that a lesser miracle if Hashem parts the sea for someone who's just a zhlug? Just an average Joe, Which is the greater nace? What?
Average Joe.
It's the same miracle. No, it's not. See, that's the whole point. The zhlub is the guy it's a greater manifestation of God's might if he splits the Red Sea for someone undeserving than if he splits the Red Sea for someone who deserves to have a nace. We find many times, in the words of the prophets and in the words of Chazal, that supernatural phenomena happen for righteous people. So it's a much more commonplace occurrence for a tzaddik to have water split for them, for miracles to happen for tzaddikim. It's a greater rarity and a much more supernatural phenomenon for miracles to happen for people who are unworthy and undeserving. So in that vein, looking at it from that perspective, who was privy to a greater miracle, the men or the women, at the events at Kriyas Yamsuf, at the events of the splitting of the Red Sea? So let's understand that if the women were the basis for the redemption from Egypt, it's like totally turns it on its upside down, right? If the women were the basis for the redemption from Egypt, because they were so righteous and they maintained their emunah and bitachon, so then it was less of a miracle for the sea to split for the women than it was for the sea to split for the men who didn't have emunah and bitachon. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
So if you're with me so far, then we understand the language of Chazal. That even according to the Rashbam, when it says Sha'af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, it means that even they were privy to a miracle. In other words, they were an integral component to Yetzias Mitzrayim because of their righteousness. Had they not maintained their righteousness, we never would have left Egypt. But that's the very fact that makes their miraculous experience of a lesser miraculous level than the miracles that were experienced by the men, because of their righteousness. And therefore, the language of Afen, even they were part of the miracle, is actually an apt usage of Talmudic language. Because they were so righteous, because they were the foundation of redemption, it was normal for a miracle to be performed. It was abnormal for a miracle to be performed for the men. And looking at it in that light, we can now understand why the Shira that Moshe Rabbeinu sings, they get to go first. Because they're privy to a greater miracle than the women. For the women, it's like, oh, sure, of course. What do you expect? We're Nashim Tzidkanios. Of course the sea is going to split for us, right? So therefore, That's why the Malachim have to feel like, okay, it's one thing that we have to let Moshe Rabbeinu and the men sing a shira because they were privy to an amazing miracle. But the women were no more privy to a miracle than we, the Malachim, were. The women are like Malachim too. It was only natural for the sea to split for them. So why do we have to wait for the women to sing shira? We should sing shira first also. That's why they had this complaint where they wanted to go ahead of the women and not ahead of the men. And it also explains why Miriam only emphasized the fact that the Egyptians were drowned in front of our eyes. She says, because the attitude of the women is, it's no big deal that Hashem split. I shouldn't say it. I mean it in a slightly irreverent way. But it's no big deal that Hashem split the ocean for us and saved us, because we're the Noshim Tzidkanios. We're the righteous women who saved the Jewish people. So of course the sea is going to split for us. But Hashem did more than that. He did that which He didn't need to do. Even for Noshim Tzidkanios, God didn't need to show us that our enemy was being utterly and completely eradicated, never to return. That was an additional chesed from Hashem, that even the Noshim Tzidkanios appreciated the miraculousness of that spectacle. And that's why Miriam emphasizes the fact and doesn't choose to discuss any other aspect of the miracle, because the other aspects of the miracle is, well, that's expected. If we're righteous, God's going to save us. But that He should not only save us, but also show us the utter defeat and complete and utter annihilation of our enemies, that goes above and beyond what even Noshim Tzidkanios would normally expect. And that's why she chooses to emphasize that part of the miracle. And now it works out beautifully. Is that less is more and more is less. You understand? Is that the fact that the women go after the men is because for them, it's Nashim Sha'ananot, as the Pasuk says, that the women have this certain sense of spiritual tranquility and harmony with all that resonates in the spiritual realm. So they don't feel that sense of shock and astonishment and surprise when these great miracles occur in the same way that the more physically based and physically oriented men do. We find a number of different sources as to this sort of spiritual sort of resonance that women have, that Rabbeinu B'Chaim, with this we'll open up the floor and take questions. First of all, the reason why she's known as Achos Aharon, she's known as the sister of Aharon in the Shira, and not the sister of Moshe, is, as the Gemara in Megillah and in other places explains, that she began her career of being a woman of great vision even before Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Gemara in source number 7 from the Gemara in Megillah Daf Yadalit, it says Miriam was one of the prophetesses of the Tanakh, and it says Dichsiv, as it says, Vatikach Miriam HaNeviya Achos Aharon. It says Miriam, the prophetess, who was the sister of Aharon. So the Gemara asks, she was only the sister of Aharon, below Achot Moshe. She wasn't the sister of Moshe. Omar Rav Nachman Omar Rav Shahita Mitna Be'ah Keshi Achot Aharon. That she began her career of prophecy even before Moshe was born, and her only sibling was Aharon. The Omeres, and she used to say, Asida imi sheteled ben sheyoshia et Yisrael. She said, my mother is going to have a child who's going to be the Redeemer of Israel. Uvisha'a shenolad, and when Moshe Rabbeinu was born, nismalei kol habayis kulo ora. The entire house filled with light. Which is why, and this is reflected in the fact that the Torah writes in PARSHA Shemos, Vatera oso kitovhu, that she saw, in other words, Yocheved saw that he was good. So the Medrash says the goodness that she saw was that there was this brilliant illumination, this radiance that was glowing off of Moshe Rabbeinu. So when everyone saw that this was a special baby, so Amad Aviha v'nashka al Rosha, her father came along, Amram comes along and gives Miriam a kiss on the head. Amar la, Biti niskayma nevuasayich. He says to her, my daughter, your prophecy has come true. But once they had to put Moshe into the Nile, then her father came and gave her a little slap on the head. because the Omar Labiti Heichan Nevu Asayach, obviously out of great frustration and terrible, terrible misery, her father says to her, "My daughter, what happened to your prophecy?" And Hainu Dichsiv, and that's what the pasuk means when it says Vatei Satzav Achosome Rachok Lidea, that Miriam stood by in the bulrushes as Moshe was floating in this basket in the Nile. She stood at a distance to see. Lidea Ma Yehi B'sof Nevuasav. It wasn't just to see what would happen to Moshe, but it was to see how her prophecy would be fulfilled, because she knew. She knew that this baby was special. She knew that his destiny was not to drown in the Nile, but rather to be the Redeemer of Israel. And so you see this kind of great vision, this kind of appreciation for the spiritual and for spiritual miraculous phenomena that exists inherently within the women of Israel, which is exemplified in Miriam. And Rabbeinu Bechaya takes it even one step further. And he says, V'hodianu, this is Rabbeinu Bechaya in his commentary on this pasuk of the shira that Miriam and the women sang. He writes, V'hodianu ki Miriam ha-neviya mikaleses la-shchina b'chol ha-nashim achareha. The pasuk tells us that Miriam, the prophetess, was praising the divine presence together with all the women. Ve'omeres ha-shira hazo ba'atzma ke-Moshe u'v'nei Yisrael. And she would say this song by herself, equally weighted to Moshe and the entire Jewish people. In other words, she possessed such great spiritual power that she was able to be equally weighted to the entire Az Yashir that was recited before her. But he goes even further. He says, "V'od timsa ikarim gedolim shebat Torah mefurashim al yedei nashim." You'll find other great fundamentals, other great ideas of spirituality that are found in the Torah and that are expressed via women. Ki inyan ha'olam haba hanikra tzoror ha'chayim al yedei Avigail. One example is the principle of olam haba, which is very, very scarcely found in Tanakh, and yet in one of the very few places where it's alluded to by Avigail, who would eventually become King David's wife, and she calls it the tzoror ha'chayim, the eternal bond of life. And the whole concept of resurrection and how to pray properly is expressed by Chana, Shmuel's mother. The Tekoite woman talks about the whole concept of reincarnation, which is alluded to in the writings of many of the Mekubalim. This indicates that a woman is not just an ancillary, secondary kind of appendage to man, but rather she has primacy. She has her own self-worth and independence and importance. Now remember, Rabbeinu Bechai is writing this one in the 14th century. Not bad, huh? Pretty progressive. V'darshu Razal b'Maseches Megillah. Our sages therefore expound in Tractate Megillah. Sheva Nevios hein Eluhein. There were 7 great prophetesses that spoke for Israel, and they are Sarah, Miriam, Chana, Devorah, Huldah, Abigail, Esther. Bezek Keneged Sheva Midos HaMekubalos. This corresponds to certain 7 kinds of mystical traits that have been passed down to us, which he doesn't bother to explain because he gets a little bit mystical at this point. Bezemevuar, and this is quite clear. The point that I guess I'm trying to convey is that if any of you ever had certain feelings of inequity in reading the Shira of Miriam versus the Shira of Az Yashir, you should be aware that this is clearly recognized or clearly sort of noted by many of the great Meforshim, like Rabbeinu Bechai, like the Chassam Sofer, and they are quick to point out that if anything, it is the terseness of the Song of Miriam, which is rather not an indication of an inferior form of prophecy, but an indication of a superior form of prophecy that exists within women. Any questions? Yes. Any questions? No? Okay. Yes. It takes men a lot longer to be able to muster the verbiage, to be able to say what they need to say. As I mentioned, women are sha'ananot. They have that sense of tranquility and clear understanding. That's the reason why.